We're both Arthur in a way. I was the blueprint, but when they play that game, they are responsible for his behavior. They are responsible for his actions. So you're with Arthur on a typical playthrough. If you're doing the whole story, it's close to 30 hours. You really do feel an attachment to that character far faster and in a far different way than you would your favorite character on a TV show.
That was the inimitable voice of Roger Clark, a.k.a. Arthur Morgan of Red Death Redemption 2. And I'm Martin Nutty.
And I'm John Lee. Welcome to our latest Global Irish Nation conversation here on Irish Stew. This episode is sponsored by Shantella, your all-in-one business launchpad in the United States. Committed to excellence and execution, Shantella helps enterprises enter or expand in the U.S. market through bespoke project management and strategic planning solutions. Create and realize your vision with Shantella, where they invest their passion in your future success. To learn more, go to shantella.space. Yes, .space. It's a thing. Thanks for joining us here on Irish Stew. And I think there will be some new listeners among you today, drawn to our guest and to his digital alter ego. You're all very welcome here on Irish Stew, and we look forward to getting inside this story of our guest just as you do. Martin, who is next to go into the stew?
Well, I'm going to be evasive, I think, John, so let's just lay this out for you all. So our next guest is an actor who has worked across multiple genres. While his career started out in the theater, he has also worked in both television and film, and has close to 100 audiobook credits to his name. However, our guest is likely best known for another medium. Specifically, he played the character Arthur Morgan in Red Death Redemption 2, or for the cognoscenti RDR2. The extraordinary, successful video game set in a mythical American West over 100 years ago. Our guest will also be honored at the Origin Theatre Gala Dinner in New York on Monday, October 30th. And for more details on that, please visit origintheatre.org. And the theater in this case is spelt European style, Theatre. So that is origintheatre.org. And who is this man of mystery? Drum roll, please, John.
Here we go.
Welcome to Irish Stew, Roger Clark.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Roger, I'm going to kick this off. Let's talk about accents, because you're pretty well known for your voice.
Yeah, my accent's all screwed up.
So tell me about your accent.
Well, I'm a plastic paddy to the Irish, and I'm just a plain old paddy to the Yanks. I was born in Jersey, and we'd spend most summers in Sligo, where my mother grew up. She met my dad in the States. She was a nurse. Emigrated over to the States in the 60s, and they met in the 70s, and then I came along soon afterwards. And I was born and raised in Jersey up until about 12, and then we moved over to Sligo for good then, and I attended secondary school in Sligo. We went to Colostamura and Ballymote, and then St. Mary's and Ballysadare. And that was it until I went to university in Wales, and I spent a lot of time in the UK. So my accent's all screwed up, and depending who I'm talking to, I often subconsciously lean one way or the other. A lot like many Misslers, and I'm sure, like they listen to their parents or what have you, and as soon as they're on the phone to their relatives, it doesn't take 30 seconds before just the accent just trebles in strength. So yeah, that's my accent. It's a bit of a hybrid, all right. But thankfully for my career, I've been able to do 3 convincing accents to a native standard. It's pretty handy.
So we had a guest actually on recently, a lady by the name of Jane Ferguson, who is on PBS NewsHour, quite a well-known foreign correspondent. And she grew up in South Armagh.
Nice.
And she spent a lot of her career constantly modifying her accent, depending on whether she was going to appear on American television or whether she was going to be appearing on British television. And I'm not quite sure what other variations she engaged in. But tell me about the pleasures of showing up in Ireland in your teenage years with
a
American
Jersey accent on top of it.
Oh, gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was a little too young to fully appreciate the gravity of the situation and how much of a cultural shock I was going to go through. I had been to Ireland before. Like I said, we had spent a lot of summers there, but I never went to school there before. I never spent a Christmas there, for example. So there was a lot of things that I wasn't prepared for. And perhaps had I been any older, I might have been more terrified. Maybe coming over at the age that I did was a good thing. But yeah, I got rid of the Yank accent pretty quickly. Although, to be fair, a lot of the a lot of the attention that I got because of it was positive, and some of it was negative, but a lot of it was positive too. Like, oh, who's the Yank? Oh, we must find out who this fella is. But still, I mean, when you're 12 years old, you don't want to stick out like a sore thumb, so you do what you can to blend in. And yeah, I did get an Irish accent fairly quickly, and then when I left Ireland and was living in the UK, it started to pull back a little bit, and then this kind of half and half thing came about, I guess. But yeah, as a young kid, I definitely sped up the assimilation subconsciously, I think.
What were some of the reactions? You know, you talked about being the 12-year-old Yank and trying to fit in Sligo. And then you mentioned you're going to be in the UK a little bit later. You went to university in Wales. How did that sort of sense of Irishness move around for you along with your accent?
Well, I feel very Irish, you know, and I've got both passports. I became an Irish citizen in 94. It was autumn of 94, and I'm very proud to be an Irish citizen. And I don't get to go home and visit as often as I would like. You know, I was there in Belfast a couple of weeks ago, and that was great. And I got to visit some of my old family in Sligo. There's not many left now, just cousins and what have you, but it was quite a journey, and I feel very strongly attached to both countries in different ways, you know. I've been called a plastic Paddy more times than I can count, and it's a name that I've actually gotten a little bit used to now. It's kind of water off of a duck's back now, and I think I am a member of both cultures, you know, and I'm very proud to be as two cultures that are very, very interconnected, as we all know, and I'm very grateful for the time that I have spent in Ireland, because it really did broaden my horizons when I was an adolescent and a teenager. And there's things that I learned in Sligo and was able to do in Sligo, and that I would not have enjoyed had I grown up in America. And I sometimes think about who that alter ego would have been had I not moved to Ireland as a teenager. You know, would I be doing the same thing? Would I be pursuing the same things? I really don't know, you know. Because I was very grateful to attend education and secondary school in Ireland, and I really feel I benefited from that, you know, and being able to go to an Irish school and take the Leaving Cert twice. I did repeat because I failed honours maths first time round, and you know they don't let you go on if you fail English, Irish, or maths.
We'll probably have to explain all that to our
Of course, yeah. Well, the Leaving Certificate's the same thing as the SATs, basically. It's the exam you take just before college. Although in Ireland, it's not multiple choice. And it carries on for about a fortnight. It's about 2 weeks, and you're sitting down with 3-hour exams. And, you know, there's an oral section, for example, with French and Irish and Spanish or whatever other languages you take. You have an oral section, an oral section. It's pretty intense. And how many subjects did I do for my leaving now? I think it was five or six or something like that. But yeah, it's a little more hands-on. The academia in Ireland is a little more intense than I would say in the States. But then again, the U.S. high schools, which I know a lot less about, but they do seem to have some very strong extracurricular activities, whereas the Irish, I think, would lean a little bit more towards the academics. But I feel very, very I feel like I have really benefited from my time growing up in Ireland, and I consider myself both very patriotic in both countries. Yeah, I know it's typical. That's what a plastic patty would say, isn't
it? So, when did acting start rearing its ugly head?
Well, that's a great segue into what talk to you about one of my favorite things. So I did do a little bit before we went to Ireland, but I didn't really get bit by the bug until the a.k.a. Dramatic Society. Now, a lot of the American listeners might confuse what a pantomime is to the Irish, but in the Irish and British tradition, the pantomime is this big family Christmas show that you go to, and everybody has a big old laugh, and it's a lot of audience interaction and participation, and they're usually based around, fairy tales like Jack and the Beanstalk, Puss in Boots, etc. So I started doing that with the a.k.a. Dramatic Society, and that would be going on during the winter, during Christmas, and then during the summer, there would often be a youth theater showcase. And that's when I really started to get involved. I would be a chorus member. I think for 5 years I did the a.k.a. Dramatic Society pantomime, which is a staple. Anyone from Sligo will know. They've been going on that's been going on as long as I have. It's 45 years. I think they did skip 1 or 2 years for COVID, but it's been going on since the late 70s. It's you can find them now at the Hawkswell Theatre in Sligo. And way back in the day, I think it was performed in the Silver Slipper Ballroom in Strand Hill, which was this old, very famous venue. It's now long gone, but Tin Lizzy used to play there. A very young U2 would have been seen there in the late 70s, early 80s. And yeah, well, the short answer to your question is a.k.a. Dramatic Society had a huge influence on me. Especially with some of the senior members as well, like Brian Devaney and Johnny Banks and Bobby Jones, some very, very amazing performers who just I thought the world of, and they're my first teachers really in many ways.
So you kind of declared your intention then almost immediately after that by going to do theatre, I think, in the University of Glamorgan. Am I correct?
That's right, yeah. Although I initially went over there to do an HND in computer studies because I thought
you could have been programming those games instead of having to act in them.
Yeah, which might have been better for employment. I don't know. Although there's no way I could have done it because I was useless at it, Martin. I was totally useless at it. And I had finished the first, I think I had done 2 semesters when I realized what a mistake I had made because I was very, very poor at computers. And it was really I wanted to do acting, but I honestly didn't think I could make a living out of it. So I went I tried to do the sensible thing, and well, it didn't take long for me to realize I'm not a very sensible person, especially when it comes to computers. And I figured you'd only got one, like so many people do at that age and throughout many ages. And you realize you only got one life, and you might as well pursue the one thing that you're passionate about, because when you love what you do, it's not work. And I decided to switch it all up and pursue a BA in theatre, media, and drama at the same university, because I had naturally flocked to them in an amateur sense whilst I was doing computers, and I got to know the department pretty well, and it didn't take long for me to realize that was what I actually wanted to do. So,
Roger, we've heard some similar stories from some of our other guests. A lot of people, that first job out of college, started off as an accountant, became a rock star. We've heard this similarly with acting as well. So we're glad you found your proper course in life.
So am I. And it wasn't easy at first, but then again, it seldom is. I think for the first decade or so, I like so many people in my profession, I wasn't able to scrape a living exclusively from acting, so I had to do other things as well. I had to bartend and go catering, but the times that I did work, which was most of the time, as you keenly observed earlier, I started out in theatre and I got to tour around doing quite a bit. out of Munich. They cast out of London mostly, but the American drama group Europe were based out of Munich. I started working for them. And I worked off and on with them for 9 years, and I think we must have done close to 50 countries, touring around the world, bringing Shakespeare around, and a lot of the classics. And I really learned a lot doing that, because you perform the same script to a lot of different cultures, and it's very interesting to hear the different reactions that you might get, you know?
You must have learned so many characters, and do those characters come back today for you? Do you pull pieces of this character and that character?
Yes, they often come back to life in many different ways. Like, I'll take a bit from that and a bit from that. Although, one thing I try to avoid using the same tools to create a character. You know, when I'm about to approach a new role, I try not to do it the exact same way as I have done in the past. I guess really just because I want to keep it fresh and make sure that I don't want to be coming up with the same type of character, basically. So I'll read the script and see what jumps out at me, what are the primary things that I feel is about the character, whether it be physical or vocal, or was it something that happened in their history? Is it what are their goals? And whatever I feel to be the strongest component of that person, that might be what I'd latch on to first. And then I'll start creating something from that. But I try not to repeat my process too often.
So talk to us about process, because I hear that word kicked around a lot in acting world. I remember seeing was Michael Douglas in the Kaminsky Method.
Oh, yeah.
On Netflix, and he's talking about his particular method and method acting, etc. So,
yeah.
What's your approach?
Oh, well, everybody has a different process, it seems, and some of them put so much impetus onto what this process is. Some of it's very, very articulated and in depth, and they spend months and months and months preparing for it, really immersing themselves into a role, and they'll come up with something amazing. And then you'll come across another guy who'll say, you know, I just learned my lines and made sure I didn't bump into anything, and come up with an equally brilliant performance. And this is no lie. I mean, we've all seen it. And so that makes me amazed to see the range of processes that each and every specific actor approaches. And like, for example, Bill Nighy or the recently departed Sir Michael Gambon, those were guys who would not have put too much onus on the method. You know, they showed up and did their jobs and learned the lines and then went home. And then you have someone like Daniel Day-Lewis, who almost knows deep down how much of an investment he's going to have to make into his character, and in some ways almost tries to avoid it now. You know, he hasn't got a huge body of work because of the amount of himself that he puts into these roles, and they're both equally brilliant performances, and I just find it really fascinating. I often think about animals. You know, I try and think of what the personification of a certain character would be, and come up with maybe a unique way to express that, either physically or vocally. And other things I like is I'll look to other things for inspiration, and a character that I think may resemble the one that I'm performing now, I might take tips from. But one thing I won't do is, if I know someone performed the same character, I'm not going to look at it until I've come up with my idea, because that'll throw some really weird ideas into my head, and then I'll start second-guessing myself. So, like, for example, now I'm working on Henry VIII, and I'm looking at performances of Henry VIII, but nothing from the same script. You know, nothing from the same script, because I need to come up with my own idea before I let someone else screw up with my head, or in this case, Robert Shaw.
Just don't practice Henry VIII dietary habits. That's not a good
try
outcome.
not to. Luckily, I'm still in the, you know, he's still a healthy man when I'm playing him. Of course, you know, of course.
So we promise our listeners we are going to get to talk about Red Dead Redemption 2 and Arthur Morgan. But before we get there, you kind of, I had this impression when I looked at what you've been up to and I looked at your presence on YouTube and places like that, that you're not somebody who waits for opportunity to come to them. You seem like you're going to make something happen. You're going to work in this area. And if that's not happening, you're going to have something warmed up over here that's going to happen. You seem very resourceful from the kind of staying in business side of being an actor.
We can't afford to sit by the phone anymore. I mean, it just doesn't ring unless you make it ring, and like I like to keep my pigeonhole as large as possible. And I feel very privileged to have been able to train and start out my career in the UK, such a rich place for theater. And, I feel very, very fortunate to have done that. But after about a decade working there, I definitely realized that there was a glass ceiling that I kind of had hit. And, I still had the old American passport, so I thought I'd give it a go here, and I was able to expand my pigeonhole because then the New York fellas, they hired me for being a Brit. I couldn't get those British roles in Britain. I couldn't fool them quite that well, and sometimes you don't want to fool them either. Like if you walk into an audition process, unless it's for a commercial or a short TV role, some people say that you should do it. I don't really feel like that's somewhat deceptive to the casting director. If you walk in character, pretending not to be where you're from, if I feel like if I'm going to have any sort of a long-standing, rewarding relationship with these people, then it's best to be as authentic out of character as it is in. So maybe that went against me because I wouldn't get many British roles when I was working in the UK, but now when I moved back to the States, I can tick those boxes now, and they buy it. So, hence Henry VIII. So I'd feel very, 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 very lucky to have worked in so many different places because it really, really helped me learn I think a unique skill set.
So, speaking of large pigeonholes, I noted on the intro that you have close to 100 audio book titles.
Oh yeah, it's over 150 now.
Woo!
And I was very fortunate to get nominated by an Audi last year.
All right,
that was my first nomination. Yeah, I used to start out. My dad would do newspaper for the blind for the Star Ledger in Jersey. He would do that like once a week, and I would help him. I was about 6 years old. And I would come and I'd cut out the newspaper articles that he was going to put on cassette at the time. I think we had a little machine where we could put it on 6 cassettes at a time. And then when we moved to Ireland, he started it up again, this time with the Sligo Champion. And he would record that at Summerhill College because they had some sound equipment there. And he started it up along with a few others. And it's still going now. The newspaper for the blind and the visually impaired, and they loved him because my dad had a very thick American accent, and he didn't really assimilate into the Irish accent as well as I did because he was a much older man, and they would love listening to this Yank reading out who died. And my dad, he'd always be saying the same jokes as many fathers would. He'd say, people are dying now, never died before. And when you read the paper, they all die in alphabetical order. And this is the funniest thing in the world, of course, but not when you're the son who's heard it 50 times. But yeah, my dad started me on that path, and I started working for Audible, I think it was around 2009, 2010. And I've been very fortunate to have a really rich career. I've learned a lot, reading a lot of history books. And we got nominated for an Audi for this book, which has a similar voice to what you might recognize in Arthur Morgan. It's this vampire Western thing called Cold as Hell. And I've enjoyed that immensely. And it's a very rich part of my career. And I was very grateful for it during COVID because that was really all I was doing. Thankfully, I could do it from home. So that was the one thing that kind of was keeping stuff going. was the audiobooks during COVID.
Roger, what's the prep process for audiobooks? Martin and I we have a lot of authors on, and we get kind of overwhelmed with all the books we have to read to have a good conversation. But you have to have an understanding of these books at another level. What kind of preparations involved?
Well, I'll usually proofread it twice. So the first time I'll just look for words that I don't know how to pronounce, and there's usually quite a lot of them. But thankfully, there's lots of apps nowadays, and the publishers more often than not will put you in touch with either the author themselves or a very hands-on editor who's pretty intimately familiar with the book, and they'll answer any questions you have about just how the correct way to say certain things. And then once I've done that, I'll proofread it again just to get the general gist and story, and if necessary, kind of see what kind of characters, what kind of voices they might embody, and I'll give that a think. And these days I work by myself. I'll do it at home. And it's intensive work and it takes a while, but I love it. And I get to my own hours, and I get to be my own boss. I can record at 2 a.m. if I have to. And, now that I got a nice enough soundproof studio, I can do it during the day too, even when my kids are trying to kill each other. So it's great.
Roger, the book you just mentioned, the Vampire Cowboy book.
Yeah, I've done three of them. Three of them now.
How long would that take you to record a book like that?
Oh, that one? Well, I wanted to concentrate on that one. So about 2 to 3 weeks, I guess. And then I'll send it on to the publisher, and they're a wonderful proof listener, will listen to my work, and then they will point out all the mistakes that I missed. And then they'll send that back for pickups, and then I do the pickups, and then boom, it's done.
So in reading about RDR2, a lot of times people, when they're talking about actors working on video game, it's usually based on voice. But as I understand it, RDR2 did something called performance capture. At least that's what your colleague Mick Malamphy explained to us when we had him on the podcast. But, so the performance capture kind of uses nodes on, and you wear, I think, a skin-tight suit, which is something I would hope I'd never have to do. But it kind of captures the movement in greater fidelity than just straight-up animation does.
Exactly. I guess the precursor to mocap, if you're familiar with an animation process called rotoscope, where they used it in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the original Walt Disney one, where there's a woman dancing with the long flowing dress, and they filmed it on celluloid. And then the animators would come in and they would trace over frame by frame, and that's what we see in the end result in Snow White, is that woman's movement transferred by an animator, frame by frame, to what we now know and recognize as the beautiful Snow White. So that was kind of a precursor, but now we do that digitally and in real time. And you'd said earlier, like, our particular game was done by performance capture. I'd say pretty close to over half, or if not half, of the games coming out today employs this method. And we're starting to see it a lot more in film too. Like anyone who saw Andy Serkis perform Gollum in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which was now over 20 years ago. Anyone who's seen behind the scenes footage of that would have seen performance capture, because that was an earlier version of it. You can imagine the stuff that they are capable of doing now. When we look at, as you say, to use your words, the high fidelity of the performance of Gollum 20 years ago, the stuff that they can do in gaming and in cinema even now today far, far exceeds that. We've got Mark Ruffalo doing it as the Hulk in Marvel, and Planet of the Apes. There's another example of Andy Serkis, and in Avatar. Maybe a lot of people would have now, at some point, I think, seen some behind the scenes footage of Avatar. So most of us have seen it. It's Lycra with the shiny balls on, and then there's usually a big helmet with a tusk or two tusks coming out of it, with cameras, an LED HD camera, LED light, and an HD camera pointed at your face to capture all the facial movements so that they can sink in the lips just perfectly, and also capture the actor's face during whatever they're capturing. And it has more in common with film and theater than it does with what it constantly keeps getting called, which is voice acting. Now, in film, it doesn't seem to suffer from that misconception, but in gaming, I'd say half of the performances in gaming now are performance capture, but just, because like calling Pepsi Coke and calling vacuums Hoovers, we still, the people in the fandom at large still refers to it as voice acting. So that's something I've been really passionate about, was to raise awareness about performance capture, because it could not be more different from voice acting. And voice acting is its own amazing medium in and of itself, and it's not going anywhere. It's always going to be a part of gaming. But performance capture is now, it's equal, and it is completely different. And I love it, because unlike film, where you'd have to go to a location and have to deal with whatever exterior effects, like be it weather or hot, heat or cold, you don't have to do that with mocap. You're in the same studio every day, and it could be the Antarctica in the morning, and then in the afternoon it's the tropics, and it's the actor's job to convey both of those atmospheres accurately. And we couldn't do it without the animators, we work very much in tandem with them, almost as much as we do with the directors and the writers, I would say. And it's just a fascinating medium to work in. I did 5 years of it on Red Dead Redemption 2. It took me 5 years to put all of my performance in the can.
Mick Malamphy, who shares some of these experiences in the franchise, he commented that the experience he felt was more akin to theater than film, in that you're like a troupe of actors working together day after day, week after week.
Yeah.
Did you have that feeling?
Absolutely. I'd say a good mixture between theater in the round, it's often referred to as. In many ways, it's more theater than film, because with film, you know exactly where the lens is, and you're playing to that lens, because that's that focal point, that very narrow and hyper-focused focal point, that's your audience. Whereas in theater, it would be one side of the stage, so it's a little less focused, but more intimate and more immediate, because they're right there. You don't have any time constraints. You don't have any filters like an editor or a director saying, you know what, let's turn that light way down. But Mick's absolutely right. It is very theatrical, often because it requires a lot of suspension of disbelief. We've got to convey, like, for example, if we were filming in what was the swamplands, that would be a question I'd ask the animator. Oh, are we in the swamp now? Okay, great. Then I'll know to swat at a few imaginary flies while we're doing it. Maybe wipe the sweat that isn't there, off of my brow, but give them the animation that they need in order to accurately portray the truth of the scene. So it is very theatrical, and then specifically with gaming too, because it differs slightly with when you put performance capture in film. But with gaming, you don't always necessarily know where the camera is going to be, because more often than not, the camera is under player control. So that does make you want to come up with a slightly more theatrical performance. You want to be perhaps not quite as subtle as you would be on film. You want to make it a little bigger, because the camera could be very, very far away. You want to make clear to the audience who is and isn't talking. Make sure that you're conveying the truth of the scene. That's within game. If I'm getting too complicated, just tell me to shut up. But one thing that's very cinematic about gaming is what we call cutscenes, and I'm sure you've heard of those. Like when you beat the big boss, there's a little scene that'll play, and this is still a huge part of gaming. And cutscenes are very, very, very more cinematic. And in those instances, usually, and more often than not, you know exactly where the camera will be. And that's when you can make your performance a little bit more subtle, because you're playing to the camera. However, it can be a trap, though, because the director could change their mind in post and put the camera somewhere completely else. And they don't have that luxury or flexibility on film. But with when you're doing digital performance capture, you can do that.
So talk to me about, I think you kind of alluded to this, but let me ask it anyway, that people don't really see the work being done in video games necessarily as full fidelity acting, if you will.
No, they
Something
don't.
that you would find on the stage or in film or in television. They kind of treat it like a poor cousin. But when we had Mick Malamphy on, I remember doing the original research on Red Dead Redemption and being astonished by the amount of money that was being spent just to create the game. And then, of course, the extraordinary amount of money that the game has generated since its release. I think it was in 2018 or 2019.
18. It's almost 5 years to the day. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's true. And it's, a lot of this number has been going around a lot, and some people may have heard of it or may not have, but the video game industry is bigger than the film industry now. It makes a lot more money now. And, but you're right. I think, and a lot of it has to do, you're right about the performances. I wouldn't say, it's hard to say. I don't know if people look down on it. I've certainly been highly applauded for my work in gaming, and I'm very grateful for it. But there definitely is a less of an understanding of it. Definitely. And the great majority of our audiences now still think it's voice acting. They still think we just read off of a script in a booth. Because that's what voice acting is. And that poses its whole new own set of challenges. But it is completely different to what we did. And, what's happening now a lot, too, is you're starting to see a lot of video game adaptations on film and in TV. We've seen the success of HBO recently. They adapted The Last of Us, along with Neil Druckmann, who originally created the game, one of the original creators of the game. And that's enjoyed a huge amount of success. And we're going to be seeing a lot more films, too, based on video games. And one of the things that I find unfortunate is that because of this lack of understanding of what the original cast did and how much they physically inhabit the characters as well as vocally, a lot of them aren't being considered they're not even getting auditions. And I remember seeing that whenever there was a film adaptation of a Broadway hit musical, the original cast would hardly ever get a look in, or if they might throw the lead a bone and he or she would have 10 seconds on at the beginning or what have you. And that's starting to happen with gaming now too, which I find is unfortunate. I understand why, but even for the reasons that I understand, for example, the Hollywood star structure, people going to a movie because so-and-so is in it. I don't think that applies as much as it used to these days. I think Marvel have demonstrated that people will go to see a movie for the character and not necessarily for the actor. And this is starting to happen more and more now. So I wish, I'm very grateful to do performance capture, but I just wish there was a little bit of a better understanding of it, both by the layman and by other parts of the entertainment industry, as to what the work actually is and what it entails of, and how easily it could be transferred to film and TV.
Roger, you hit a key word there. We have been talking about this in terms of technology, in terms of acting techniques, in terms of the business model. But let's talk about the character. People love this character. I mean, you're reading the comments online. Arthur Morgan, your character, where did he come from, and what animal were you personifying when you came up with how you handled Arthur Morgan? When I was the 5 years I was working on Red Dead, I was hoping, if this sells as much as Red Dead Redemption, the original, I'll be a very happy man. And we achieved that. And I'm very grateful for it. But the reception that I've got, it was unanticipated. I'll be the first to admit. I've had generations of families come up to me saying, I don't often go for these video games, but I heard my grandson shouting, and I just peeked my head in through the door, and now I'm level 76 online, and I've beaten it more times than my son, and I just think you're fantastic. And that my father used to scream at me to get off the thing. I often think if he could see me now, he'd probably have a good old chuckle about it. But it really has. It's a real privilege to be
able to have such an appreciative and large audience for something that you've done. And I still pinch myself up and down both arms now, and I'm very, very grateful.
I think they're interacting with you in a way that you don't get to interact when you're at a play or you're at the movies. And then, they chime in with their own fan fiction and their
because they are me.
Cosplay. And
we're both Arthur in a way. I was the blueprint, but when they play that game, they are responsible for his behavior. They are responsible for his actions. So, and you're with Arthur typically on a typical playthrough. If you're doing the whole story, it's close to 30 hours. So you really do feel like part of this. This happens to me when I play games. You really do have an attachment to that character far faster and in a far different way than you would your favorite character on a TV show. Because in TV and film, we're an audience, whereas in gaming, we are willful participants in the narrative. We affect what happens. And that empowers us as an audience. And I think in many ways, when gaming is done right, it immerses us even more. So yeah, I can't believe it.
Could you slip into character for a moment? And
sure, yeah. Yeah, I do. I'm wishing so many people happy birthday every day. I'm talking into my phone, wishing these cowpokes a happy birthday and screaming out Lenny and giving the odd cough. Sorry about that. It's just a little tickle in my throat. No, I'm fine, really. I'm honestly fine. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And when I was creating Arthur, I was doing Shakespeare off Broadway when I was auditioning for it, and my dresser was this fella from where was he from in Arizona? I forget the town now. But he was from this small town in Arizona, and he helped me with the cowboy accent. And a bit of Southern did creep in into his voice after that. But I didn't go for an animal with Arthur. I knew my first audition, they asked me to wear cowboy boots. They didn't say what it was for, but they asked me to wear cowboy boots and to come in with a cowboy accent. So I did that. But I have three main inspirations for Arthur. One of them is Rob Wiedoff, who played the lead protagonist of Red Dead Redemption, a character by the name of John Marston. And what Rob taught me was don't try and do what he did, because that would have been a futile exercise. You got to do your own thing, because John Marston is well adored all by his lonesome. And then there's a bit of John Wayne in Arthur. I grew up preferring Clint Eastwood, but Clint Eastwood's a little too stoic for Arthur, and John Wayne had a very dry wit and a dry sense of humor often, and I think that's a bit of that seeped into Arthur. And another actor who I really took a huge inspiration from was this Japanese fella called Toshiro Mifune, who did a lot of Kurosawa movies, and he was the lead in Seven Samurai and Yojimbo and Sanjuro, and the two movies themselves, which eventually got twisted into Westerns. So he played this amazing, he would often play this Ronin samurai or the wandering samurai that he could be terrifying one second, hilarious the next. And he kind of had this very relaxed, very stoic demeanor. And I would say Toshiro Mifune was a huge influence for Arthur.
So because I'm a total tech geek, so I'm going to dial back into the tech end of things a bit, because obviously there's been a lot of labor action over the past few months, specifically with the acting community. And part of that particular discussion has got to do with digital property. To what degree studios, producers of content, and I know people despise that word, have the right to use likenesses. So there was a recent story about Tom Hanks, who somebody has used his likeness to pitch a product.
Without his permission, yeah.
Without his permission, So I'm curious, because your work on Red Death really puts you on the cutting edge of this, because you understand probably better than most actors exactly what can be done with this technology.
Yeah.
So what's your view about what way we're going forward? And are you really concerned about it? Are you seeing it as maybe there's going to open up more possibilities?
I'm
What's your
very
take?
concerned.
Mhm.
But as you pointed out with the current dispute going on in Hollywood, the writers finally resolved their strike, and the writers got some AI protections that are very encouraging. And I think that if we can expect the same for SAG-AFTRA, then I think a lot of protections will be put into place. It's for us not to, first of all, have our likenesses and voices stolen, for lack of a better word. I don't know what other word I could use. It's if it's done without permission, I think it is theft. So if we could get the same stuff that the writers did, I would be very encouraged. And I think I read about a month or so ago, the feds brought in a new law, and I think California State are doing it too, where anything created by AI cannot be copyrighted. Any art created by AI cannot be copyrighted, and that's a good thing too. But yeah, I know the studios, a lot of gaming studios. My biggest concern is they're trying to they capture your likeness, and they do capture it. But some of them are trying to use that footage in perpetuity, whereas you're signing a contract to give them permission to use it for one performance for one game. And then some of them are then putting that data into a big old vault. And then if it's just a guy brushing the front porch, they take it out again and put it in the next game, oftentimes not to the performer's knowledge. So that's a little bit concerning. We want to make sure that if our work is being used, that we're being rightfully compensated for that. And it should be that way for the animators too. It's a huge, huge talented workforce in gaming now. And actors do take up a smaller piece of the pie of it than they do in theater and TV and film. That's a fact. There's so many other people too that these performances would not be transmittable to the audience if it weren't for the animators too, and the people who are recording it. And these animators do amazing, amazing work, and often grueling work, just fine-tuning everything that we do so that it fits into the atmosphere that they've digitally created perfectly. So
they really sweat the details.
They really do.
They must just love the kind of the effects they get and compare it among their community. And
yeah,
do we notice every one of them? I'm not sure, but they do, and it all adds up.
So unfortunately, or fortunately, nobody wants to strike. But currently, SAG-AFTRA, we have 2 contracts in dispute, 2 major contracts. It's just film and TV, but it looks like gaming might be joining that now, because negotiation for that is out of date, and they may be joining the dispute. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. But whatever does happen, I hope we're all get to go back to work as soon as possible with the appropriate protections put in place,
So can I ask about the challenges of following up RDR2? I note that this year there's a new game out called Fort Solis that you're playing actually an Irish named character, I believe. Is it Jack Leary or John Leary? I'm not sure.
Jack Leary, yeah. Yeah, that came out last month. And to answer your question, I don't know how you follow up from Red Dead 2. It's the 8th biggest selling video game of all time. We've got over 50 million copies sold now. So I don't know, but it was a joy working on Fort Solis. And it was also, what's really fascinating for me is every time I pop into a performance capture volume, that's what they name the name of the stage. We call it the volume. Every time I go in, if it's been a few months, there's usually some new, really cool technological innovation, which I nerd out over. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you mean we can do this now? And it usually means saving a lot of time. But I don't know. Red Dead was certainly a career climax. I don't know if it'll be beat. And if it's not, I'm totally happy with that. As long as I keep getting new challenges, I'm going to be very, very happy. And that's what's happening now. So I'm a kid in a candy store, and I'm very blessed. And the success of Red Dead has allowed everything post Red Dead to have access to perhaps a bigger audience than it would have previously. So I'm really grateful for that. Fort Solace came out last month on PlayStation 5 and Steam.
You mentioned a career achievement. You've got a nice achievement coming up here at the end of the month with the Origin Theater, with the award from that. It's a great company. Mick Malamphy, who's the artistic director, already a guest, friend of yours.
Yeah.
Maybe that's one of your Seamus plugs.
Oh, yeah. You know, when I first moved, I moved back to the States in 2008, and the first Irish Festival was one of the first bits of theater I saw when I moved back, and it was back when George Heslin was artistic director, and I got very friendly with Origin very quickly, and we did a lot of readings together. I auditioned for, and then I was lucky enough to work for them, myself and Mick. We did Guy Walks Into a Bar. It was a three-hander, and myself and Mick were the leads, and that was a joy. That was a real joy, not to work with Mick on stage, because we had worked together before, but we had never done it on stage. And our wonderful director, Tim Ruddy, as well. That was a real joy to put on at the First Irish. And Mick was lucky enough to win Best Actor for that year's festival. So I was very, very proud to be a part of that. But now to get this acknowledgement is really genuinely overwhelming. Origin Theatre is one of the best Irish theatre companies in New York City, without a doubt. And it's on my Mount Rushmore for Irish theatre in the city, that's for sure. And just to get this recognition from them at the gala going on the 30th is really, I don't know how to, I got to say a speech. And I think I can only be able to come up with 3 or 4 minutes, but to be recognized by a community that I love, and to have the opportunity to spread awareness, like all the stuff that we were talking about here, and to re-accentuate theatre, the importance of theatre too, because theatre's taken a hammering since COVID. And I'm in rehearsal right now, and we're still not at pre-COVID audiences yet, and it's a real shame. And maybe one of the ways we can remedy that is to get gamers to come into the theatre. And if there's any way I can help with that, then I'm going to do it.
Anything else? Well, that's you can have more than one plug.
Oh, well, yeah, the first Origin, the gala is going on the 30th, and I've got a lot of audiobooks on Audible. If you just search my name, Roger Clark, and as I mentioned before, Fort Solace came out on the PlayStation 5 and on Steam last month, and it's not as big as Red Dead. You'd get it done in maybe 5 or 6 hours, so it's a little bit more manageable, a little bit more bite-sized, but it's pretty terrifying as well. It's set on Mars. It's a thriller, and it was a joy to make. And I co-star along with Troy Baker, who's also a very well-known actor in gaming. You'd know him as Joel from The Last of Us, and he's done loads and loads of other work as well. His resume is 10 times longer than mine. Troy Baker was a joy to work with, too, on it.
So, with all that, on behalf of both John and I and our listeners, we'd really like to thank you, Roger, for coming on and giving us a deeper insight into performance capture, audiobooks, theater, television. Is there some other genre that we actually don't know about that we haven't included so far?
Well, those 2 things I forgot to mention. One is another thing. We're doing A Man for All Seasons at the Shakespeare Theatre of New Jersey in Madison, New Jersey. That opens on the 18th, and we run until November 5th. You can see me play Henry VIII there, and that's a lot of fun. We're almost getting into tech, so rehearsals coming along very encouragingly. If you're in the North Jersey area, I heartily recommend. And then I've been producing a few short films too during COVID, because I'm grateful for the opportunities I do get, but because of what I was talking about earlier, how so much of film and TV doesn't quite get what we do in gaming yet, some of those opportunities have kind of gotten a little dry. So I've started producing my own short films alongside some great, great writers and filmmakers in Connecticut. There's a huge pool of talent in the tri-state area.
Roger, was Hazardous one of those films?
Yes, it was, yeah. And we were lucky enough to win a few awards around the film festival circuit. And now we're just finishing up on our new one called Damn Handy. starring me. And if you want to follow my socials, I'll keep you up to date on the info for that as well.
I recommend Hazardous. It's on YouTube. It's original.
Yeah.
It's got some great elements to it, and it has, without giving away anything, I hope, you pull off one of the most impressive instantaneous character changes I've ever seen on film or on the stage. So I'll just leave it for you to our gaming fans and our Irish Stew listeners to check that out on YouTube. Also, I think there was a Best Supporting Actor nod for the Buick Invicta that appears in
that was a gorgeous car. 1958 Buick Invicta. It only ran for about 4 years. It tried to compete with the Cadillac, but it couldn't. But I drove that thing. It was like driving a yacht. It was a beautiful car. It was so big. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really enjoyable short film, and we'll be sure to include that in our show notes. And I'm glad we actually got to do a redo on this, because you've thrown in some additional material for all your fans and for our listeners. And again, thank you so much for coming on. It's
Thanks
been a
for
lot of
having
fun.
me. This
We're
was
looking
great.
forward to seeing you on October 30th. John and I will both be down at the Origin Theatre Gala, and so hope to catch up in person as opposed to the virtual studio that we're recording in right now.
Yeah, and if anyone else is interested in coming, I know that you can buy the tickets on their website. If you search Origin Theatre, don't forget the European spelling, as Martin pointed out earlier. Yeah, I'm sure you'll have a link for tickets if you like. It's be helping a wonderful cause.
It should be fun. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, theatre.
Everybody I've met connected with the theatre is great. So.
Theatre needs your help right now. It's still just as good as it always was. But, we got to get back in there after COVID.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is origintheatre.org. Thank you, Roger. Well, after that recording session, John, unfortunately, my voice no longer cuts it, I think.
You could be replaced by AI. We better be thinking about that too, Martin. We've got a body of work that can be stolen by the AI machine.
Yeah, I guess the day AI decides to consume all 70 episodes of Irish Stew, I'll be feeling pretty good about it on one level, but on another level, the spidey paranoid side of me that I try not to show in public might be getting activated.
Back to what we just heard, it was really, really great to meet Roger. I didn't know all that much about his career. I got to learn a lot about the gaming industry, but what a great guide. He brought us right inside. And also, I'm not kidding, people love this guy, love this character. There's an intense level of fandom around this game and around Arthur Morgan.
Yeah, it's a whole new thing, and maybe it's just because my hair is gray. I hadn't realized exactly where video games had gone. I will admit to having had a deep addiction for Space Invaders back in the 1970s, but let's say the technology's gotten a little bit better, and it's just an astonishingly beautiful genre. Yeah. As done, certainly in Red Dead Redemption 2. It's just a beautiful looking piece of work. And it represents extraordinary opportunity for actors. And Roger made reference to the fact that he had started off doing a lot of Shakespeare. And as I understand the very original Shakespeare in the 1600s, there was very little in the way of set at all. It was done pretty much on an empty stage. And what Roger seemed to be explaining to us is that this experience in doing performance capture is really an experience of theater in the round, and it is just wonderful.
Well, all our legions of listeners here, they can hear us talk on Irish Stew a lot, but if they want to come meet us, but more importantly, meet Roger Clark, come to the Origin Theatre Gala on October 30th. You can sign up. It costs a few dollars, all well worth it. Support theater, meet Roger, have a great evening out.
Looking forward to it. See you on October 30. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.